Hello, everyone. I am Chuang. Let's draw the skull of Edmontosaurus. The skull of Edmontosaurus has typical features of hadrosaurids. Its mouth was relatively flat. The anterior of this dinosaur's mouth had no teeth but a duckbill-like beak. When drawing its skull, we can clearly see this structure. Meanwhile, we can also see its teeth were actually located behind the beak, in the posterior part of the mouth. Therefore, it is better to understand its skull before we get to know the Edmontosaurus. Knowing these features will be very helpful for the future restoration. In addition, the top of Edmontosaurus' skull was flat without any crest structure, but there was a fleshy comb when it was alive. When drawing its skull, especially when we finally show the outer skin contour, we can use shading to show the range of its fleshy crest. This will make it easier to understand which parts of the skull are additional soft tissues. Now, let's draw the skull of Edmontosaurus. First, let's compose the picture, roughly locating the skull on the paper. Then, we begin from the top of its head. Draw a relatively straight line to represent the structure above its eyes. Then, this forward and downward curving line represents its nasal bones. Now, let's draw its orbit. Its orbit was not a circle but like an inverted, slantly placed pear. The upper part of the eyes was relatively round. Its postorbital is a small triangular bone. At the front, there was a notch extending forward. The bone that formed the front of the orbit was the lacrimal bone. Let's show this structure. The lower part of the orbit was a very large bone called the jugal bone. Here was its lateral temporal fenestra. The temporal fenestra was a typical structure in reptiles. When it was alive, this part would accommodate some muscles. Then, let's draw the occipital and sphenoid bones at the back of its skull. Then, let's move forward to draw its nostril. The upper top of its nostrils was composed of very long nasal bones, and the entire nostril was an oblique rectangle. We draw a boundary here, and before this line would be the premaxilla, which also formed the shape of the duckbill-like mouth of hadrosaurids. Then, we draw its upper jaw, which should look like a triangle. All the upper teeth of Edmontosaurus were on the maxilla. When viewed from the side, only one row of teeth can be seen. From the inside, we can see that they are arranged row by row like a wall piled up with bricks. Then, let's draw its lower jaw. The front end of the lower jaw was a duckbill-like structure, corresponding to the upper jaw. Then, there was its long mandible, which had an extended structure inserted into the upper jaw. The teeth corresponding to those on the maxilla were located on the dentary bone in front of the mandible. Let's show its entire slender and curved mandible. Its articulation was on the rearmost surangula. Then, we draw the quadrate bone at the posterior part of the Edmontosaurus skull. Then, we draw its sclerotic ring in the orbit. Now, let's use dark lines to draw its flesh and skin. First, use these somewhat thick, dark lines to trace along the skull to show the contour of the epidermis. The anterior part of the mouth was a keratinous beak that extended downward when it was alive. This makes its mouth look larger. Then, let's trace along its lower jaw. What we do is equivalent to deepening its outer contour to show the thickness of the flesh and skin. Now, let's fill in the hollow structure with dark lines. There were 2 rows of nutrient foramina on the outside of its upper and lower teeth. Then, let's fill in the hollow part of the nose with dark lines. The same goes for the eye socket. The inner diameter of its sclerotic ring was the size of its eyes, in life that we could see, so this dinosaur had tiny eyes. Let's also blacken its temporal fenestra. Then, we can thicken its throat, because this part would droop down, and the skin may be more prominent when viewed from the side. Let's also fill in the gap between the lower and upper jaws. We do not need to color the large block in the neck black completely, but leave some white space to make the whole picture relaxed and breathable. On the dorsal side of the neck, we can draw some protrusions. Next, let's draw the crest of the Edmontosaurus. Although this dinosaur has no crest structure on its skull, it had a fleshy comb when it was alive, resembling a rooster. Then, let's strengthen the concave structure with darker lines. All the structures on the skull that should be depressed can be strengthened by using shadings to make the skull look more three-dimensional. Finally, cast some shadows on the surface of the bone to give it more sense of volume. In this way, we've finished drawing the skull of Edmontosaurus.